Right, okay, we're back again, and today the story is about food. The title is Don't Ever Buy Cheap Frozen Peas, and I'll explain to you why I think, it's my personal opinion of course, it's why I think you should always buy the most expensive frozen peas you can afford. And it's only from personal experience, because in the early 2000s, then I worked for some time in the pea industry. Would you believe? Oh my gosh, this is something quite different. But I was lorry driving, and in early 2000s, Ruth was taken ill, and she was off work for over half a year. And then she had to retire early because she wasn't getting any better. And so I was looking for some other way of earning some pennies to pay our family bills. Right, the horse centre was gobbling all the money that came in by way of donations, and still Ruth had paid back £38,000 of debt that had landed on us after the beginning of the national lottery. And so we hadn't got a lot of money, so I started looking at what I'd got. I got an HGV license, so I thought, right, and I needed to be here during the day looking after the horses. I'd need to be there. We've got some helpers and volunteers, but I needed to be there during the day. So lorry driving at night was something I was looking for. And I began working for an agency, Market Raisins somewhere they were, and I was driving for Pennell's at Lincoln. Fridays every week, and sometimes Thursdays as well. That was quite interesting, delivering the flowers that Pennell's grew in Lincoln. Roses and clematis were their specialities, and they were quite enjoyable jobs, except that because I knew London, I ended up doing all their deliveries in London every Friday. That was entertaining. The 16-ton box van in the heart of London. Of course, this is before they brought in all these restrictions and things, there was just traffic. Right, let's get down to the peas. And the Pennell's job came to an end because they decided to stop producing these things, because the Dutch folks were producing them cheaper, and they could supply a lot cheaper than Pennell's could. And of course Pennell's was sat on a fortune with the land they got that were used for growing things just outside Lincoln, and so that job stopped. Then I managed to come across a job driving a lorry. This was only June and July, or maybe the end of May up to July, and this is the season for frozen peas. I can't remember how I initially got involved in this, but I was driving for Madison's at Coningsby. They had this contract for moving peas from the fields to the frozen food plants, and when the season starts, frozen peas are a very expensive crop, and they're subject to the weather. It's a very risky job, and they can mature rapidly. The chaps are going around looking at these fields of peas all the time, and to make sure that in rotation, because they're planted in rotation, and so they could be harvested in rotation, and thereby manage to harvest them without any waste. But the machines that are doing it, these harvesting machines, cost millions of pounds each. And once they start, they don't stop. They're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, non-stop, harvesting all the time. Of course, fill it with diesel, and somebody else have a sandwich, I suppose, and that kind of thing. But basically, they're running all the time, and then they move from site to site, and there's the harvesting machines and the tractors that go with them. There's a mobile workshop, and there's diesel bowsers and water. So when you see them moving from field to field, it's like a convoy of things. A lot of money involved. So I was driving a tipper lorry for Madison's. Philip Madison, of course, used to work for Ray Larrington. I'm working on a story about Ray Larrington because, I've diversed again, but when I worked at Standard in the 60s, then Ray Larrington came to see my boss, Roy Webley, to devise an advertising campaign to boost his business. I mean, it's Ray Larrington, the muck spreader. I bet you don't remember this, but Roy was brilliant at advertising, and he made Ray Larrington a household name. The way he produced the ads, and they were tricky, and they were in the same place every week, and Ray business grew enormously, and it was spreading muck all over the whole of the East Midlands. Right, Philip worked for Ray at one time. I remember Philip. So I was working at nights for Madison's. I think it was probably 2 lorries each night, depending on where the peas were being harvested and where they had to go to. For instance, if we're harvesting off Ward's farms out on the fens near Holbeach, and the peas had to go probably to Bourne, maybe Boston at night, but I think some of them went to Bourne actually. But you'd have to get your foot down, to zoom off and take your load of peas, 10 tons or whatever, to the frozen food plant, tip them quick, and then zoom back again, and you'd meet the other lorry on his way as you were going back. And there's the trailers in the field were taking the peas from the viner, and then these trailers lifted up like a scissor system underneath them, so they didn't just tip, they actually went right up, so they came above the lorry sides and then tipped into your lorry, the peas. Quite clever things. But they had to be from the time of vining, and the times are regularly checked. I mean, this was quite serious stuff. The times the peas were checked, and in that trailer load it had a paper certificate or whatever saying that these peas had been vined at X time, and they had to be received at the frozen food plant no later than another X time. The bird's eye saying, bird's eye peas, very fresh, something about the pod won't pop or something. But they had to be there in a very short time to maintain that freshness in the peas, the taste and the freshness. And because as soon as they're out the pods, then they're starting to degrade, they're starting to lose the taste and lose the freshness, so you had to zoom off pretty quick and get them frozen. So this is quite an intriguing job, really. I mean, we used to go all over I worked with a gang that did South Lincolnshire. We did right over near Grantham, Sleaford, Holbeach, Bourne, south of Spalding, and we did go once or twice up to the Wolds actually. I remember we did do some harvesting just on the edge of the Wolds and took peas into Grimsby frozen food plant, mainly the Christian Salversons. They had most of the frozen food places, throughout Lincolnshire. But you wouldn't imagine they're there, but they are. They're very busy, working 24 hours a day too. So this, thank you, Milu. Yeah, thank you, Milu. I'll have to take a break for a minute because I think Milu wants to go out. He's down here making a noise in my office, and he wants me to let him out, so just take a break. We're back. I've just let Milu out. Basically the thing, they're timed, and the peas are normally frozen very quickly to maintain the freshness and of course the quality control, very important, because if the peas are absolutely top quality, they get the best price, and of course then they're sold to, once they're frozen, then the pea group who grew them will sell them on to somebody who will sell them to you, the consumer. Going back to the vagaries of the weather, I mean, there's other things. Machine breakdowns don't help either, but these viners aren't very old. They're not very old, and they're very well maintained, and they're they didn't often break down. But I remember one occasion when a chap driving once the other side of Spalding, and he didn't notice that he was driving close to a little gully on the edge of the field, and these things are very top heavy. Anyway, he ran off this little roadway and the thing rolled over. It turned turtle. They got it, because you soon pull it back up again with some tractors about, but it bent an axle. I think his back axle was steering axle, and big front wheels. Anyway, it kept going. It had to keep going. So it was capable of viding. So bits would be ordered and whatever and changed at the earliest possible moment. But the thing had to keep going. So it had done a somersault, but it was still going. That was an interesting episode. I didn't see it. I just came on. It was just before I started work one night, and it had happened. Right, going back to the weather. Now, if you got bad weather, then rain and things. So rain, it would spoil the peas that are almost matured and ready for harvesting. Something like heavy storm and hail and all that kind of thing would be death knell to the quality of these things. And so the people organising the harvesting, and a decision had to be made as to whether these peas were going to go and what they're going to do. I remember one year we had just a bad spell, and the peas had to go to Beulah's at Wisbeach and be canned. So they were sold off as canning peas, so that must have been a bit drastic. But the middle of the time that I was working on this pea job, I spent 2 or 3 years at Madison's, and then John Hoff at Holton Holgate got a contract, and I think that was with Ward's, or it had been Ward's at Carrington, and somebody else had bought Ward's Farms as somebody else, and they got this name for this pea group. And I think I worked for John for 1 or 2 years, and then back to Madison's. Oh, the other thing is, of course, Madison's lorries, a lot of them during the daytime, they're carrying sand and gravel. So when you pick the lorry up from the yard, you had to make sure the thing was clean. And if it wasn't, you had to clean it out. There's no good taking a load of peas into a frozen food factory after you'd had sand and gravel in the lorry. If it wasn't super clean, big problems. Right, one year the weather was absolutely abysmal one week, and everything was against getting decent peas. But this wasn't just in Lincolnshire, it's all over the country, because it isn't just Lincolnshire they grow peas for freezing, it's all over. And this one particular week, we were taking peas into a factory. There was only one factory that accept them. Fairly local to Lincolnshire. It wasn't in Lincolnshire, but fairly local. When I got there, I got a 6-wheeler, and I must have had 10-12 tons of peas in it, right at the top of the body. And when I got there, I was staggered, because there was lorries there from all over England trying to tip peas for freezing into this factory. And this particular factory had got chutes, places to tip the peas into a frozen food setup. It had got probably 4 or 5 of them. It wasn't just a little place. 4 or 5 frozen food systems where you could tip your peas in. Well, I was in a great long queue, and I must have been there 3 or 4 hours. And it was, by that time, it was well daylight, you see. I'd been there, I probably got there about 7 in the morning, and by that time it was midday or 1 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the afternoon time I got tipped. And the sun had been baking down then. And I'd got, in the top of my lorry, there was about, I've got a ruler here. There's about, let's have a look. We've got inches, I'll get inches on it, yeah. It's upside down, inches, right. There was about 3 inches of peas in the top of this load, which were black. I mean, they were fresh and juicy, but very wet, because it had been raining, and these peas, I mean, the vines were wet, the fields were wet, and that with the cooking effect in the top of the lorry with the heat of the sun, they'd gone black. And so anyway, this chap said, "Oh, come here, mate, come here, mate, tip your lorry in here, mate." So I said, "Well," but I says, "they're all black." He says, "Oh, don't worry about that." He says, "There's some little gnomes inside here who are going to turn them green." So I thought, "Oh well, right, all right, off you go." And beside the chute where I was tipping these peas into, there's some big boxes, because when they come out of the freezer plant, they're in a box about 1 metre by 1 metre, but they're about 2 or 3 metres high. It's like a big square tube on a pallet, and they're full of frozen peas, or frozen whatever, and that's how they're stored until, you know, in a big chill room and frozen place, until they're sold or whatever. Anyway, I said, "What's happened to these?" And it always says they didn't freeze properly, so we're going to put them in again. So these were rows of these beside the chute. He says, "I'm going to, when you've gone," he says, "I'm going to tip them in with your lot." It's true, you know, it's quite true. So every business has its secrets. No matter what you're looking at, every business there's a way of doing shortcuts and saving money in every business you look at. I can tell you a few shortcuts in the brewery trade, working behind the bar, because I used to look after a cellar in the mid-1950s. Yeah, so frozen peas, there are some shortcuts. Believe me, pay as much as you can when you buy your frozen peas. If you want the best and the tastiest and everything else, don't buy cheap frozen peas, all right? Keep them to put on your injured leg or black eye or whatever you've got, but don't eat them. Anyway, Cracker Books up here somewhere. I hope you enjoyed that little story. Have a look at the website. There's oodles of things to look at. On the Buzzsprout podcasts, there's over 200 podcasts you can download and listen to. There's books you can download and read. Kiddies books, picture story books, and the It's a Rum Life books. And thanks for being with us today. Until the next time, cheerio.